Welcome to our first video on Dorothy Day's biography of a contemporary saint, Thérèse. Written in the 1950s and eventually published in 1960 by Notre Dame's Fides Press after a rejection from her original publisher, Thérèse is one of Dorothy Day's more obscure texts. Certainly Dorothy's career as a journalist and diarist, which spanned 6 decades of the 20th century, offers texts with more insight into the gritty details of life at the Catholic worker and the class conflicts and social conflicts that formed her political consciousness. And certainly St. Thérèse, who was declared a doctor of the Church on the centenary of her death, has had many biographers and hagiographers. In the middle of the post-war decade, living under threat of nuclear war, and surrounded by those the American age of prosperity had left behind, what compelled Day to take time from her other writing, speaking engagements, looking after the affairs of the worker, and her family life to write this book? And what draws us today to read it? Thérèse Martin died at the end of September in 1897 in an unheated Carmelite convent in Lisieux, France. Less than 6 weeks later, on the other side of the Atlantic, Dorothy Day was born in Brooklyn, New York. The two women could outwardly not have had more different lives. One, a nun, who entered a strictly cloistered order as a 15-year-old girl and died of tuberculosis at 24. The other, an anarchist journalist and single mother who discovered her vocation at the age of 35, traveled the world, and lived to see her great-grandchildren. Thérèse's entire adult life was lived out in the enclosure of the Lisieux Carmel. Dorothy's life was defined by the chaos of the Catholic worker houses of hospitality and farms, and the often dangerous work of nonviolent direct action for peace. And yet, it was through the worker that Dorothy came to understand and appreciate the message of St. Thérèse. Robert Ellsberg, who lived at the New York City Catholic Worker in the mid-1970s, and when he was 20 became the managing editor of the Catholic Worker newspaper at Day's request, suggests in his foreword to the 2016 edition of Thérèse that the spirituality of Thérèse's little way is a key to interpreting the implications of Day's own life and witness. Ellsberg, who went on to edit multiple volumes of Day's work after her death, notes that much of this insight came once we were able to read Dorothy's diaries and learn more about her interior experiences of the long years of writing, offering hospitality, and protesting war and other forms of violence and exploitation. Day found the work of writing a life of Thérèse to be slow and uninspired, despite her great love and admiration for the saint. Day felt that the social implications of Thérèse's message had been under-discussed in all previous theological and biographical work, and that the modern world urgently needed the message of the little Carmelite. Nonetheless, Day realized even in the writing the text that she ultimately produced perhaps revealed more about Day herself and Thérèse only secondarily. What might appear to be a shortcoming in this book can rightly be understood as a grace. And this will be a recurring theme in the text, God's transformation of apparent failure. What do we gain by reading the life of one saint through the eyes of another? Day's stated intent was to, quote, make people realize their personal responsibility, how everything they do matters. Ellsberg writes that, in a time when so many feel overwhelmed by the vast powers of the world, she bore witness to another power, one disguised in what is apparently small and weak. Certainly life at the Catholic worker offered daily, hourly opportunities for self-mortification, the little decisions to sacrifice one's time, privacy, comforts, and cravings for the sake of others. It was the practice of these small, daily choices, as rigorous as anything St. Thérèse could have desired, that equipped Day for the extraordinary and heroic actions she performed on a wider stage. To put it another way, the virtues of courage, wisdom, and fortitude required to sit unarmed before a line of police officers, as Dorothy did at her final arrest, were all honed through decades of daily service on the soup line. What links these two women, Thérèse and Dorothy, is the idea that in every task done in love, you can increase the amount of love in the world, that tiny acts of love are transformative, and that in God's economy, nothing goes to waste. I'd like to suggest 2 guiding questions for our study of Thérèse. The first is to evaluate the text on the strength of the author's own argument. Day hoped, in this book, to untangle the social implications of Thérèse's teachings for the modern reader. What does Dorothy understand as the social message of Saint Thérèse? Does the little way mean anything in light of the Shoah, the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, in light of systemic racism and mass incarceration, or climate change? Does this book succeed in its task? The second question is the one that perhaps has more to do with Dorothy than Thérèse. What insight does this book give us about Day's own struggle to live the little way in her decades at the Catholic Worker? In her diary, Day wrote, "Working on Thérèse, but I feel a nervous wreck with so many neurotic people, women, etc." In most of Day's writing, she freely tacks back and forth between discussions of theology and political theory, reflections on literature and art, current events, and anecdotes of family life at the Worker, eventually weaving them all together into a coherent tapestry. Here, Day has attempted to stay small and focused, and what we can learn of her own life is alluded to, not explicitly stated. What can we discover about the spirituality of the Catholic Worker from how Dorothy presents the life of Thérèse? What moments of grace, what flashes of clarity from both the cloister and the house of hospitality does Day put forward to an anxious, busy, threatened world? In what small things does God make himself present? In Thérèse, Day offers us an example of perseverance and faith, which embraces suffering and failure, knowing that the God of love sees the pain of the world and will not abandon us to destruction. She also offers us the bracing truth that our lives, however small and ordinary, are filled with eternal purpose. Every act of solidarity, every protest or witness for peace, however foolish or futile it might seem, sends an echo of love out into the world, an echo that God amplifies on the return. God, for both Saint Thérèse and Day, is deeply relational, working both within and through us. Nothing in creation fails to hold God's interest, and nothing is left behind or forgotten. Roughly speaking, the first 4 videos in this series cover material from the introduction, preface, and chapters 1 through 7. The second 4 videos cover chapters 8 through 13, and the last 4 videos cover chapters 14 through 18 in the afterword. You can find any supplementary readings linked in the description, and all the citations are available in the transcripts and closed captioning. I really hope you love this book, and I look forward to hearing your reflections over the coming weeks. Thanks.